If you were asked to define what marriage is, how would you answer? No. Dangerous question. One simple philosopher has suggested the following. He says, marriage is when you agree to spend the rest of your life sleeping in a room that's too warm for you beside someone who's sleeping in a room that's too cold for them. Not bad. Most couples can probably relate. But perhaps more directly to the point, another person says, marriage is the art of falling in love over and over again, always with the same person. Marriage, the art of falling in love over and over again with the same person. This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today in our ongoing study of the Ten Commandments, we arrive at kind of the R-rated portion of the law. We turn to consider the topic of marriage as being part of the series of final commandments in which God focuses our attention around how we properly live out some of the most basic components of human life. 3 weeks ago, the topic was family. Last week, it was life and death. Next week, it's property. And this week, marriage. And what is the one piece of instruction that God offers regarding the subject? You shall not commit adultery. Now, as with last week's command, in the original Hebrew, this is just 2 words. No adultery. Very clear and obviously very good advice. That is, a married person is not to have intimate relations with anyone besides their spouse. As the old saying goes, marriages are like diets. They can be ruined by having a little dish on the side. It's perfect instruction, yet still, if you could offer only one piece of advice on the subject of marriage, one of the human bonds central to civilization, would this be it? Does this sum up all that needs to be said about having a happy, healthy marriage? Why has God singled this out to be the one thing said on the subject here? What is this really all about? Well, as with the discussion of the 6th commandment last week, I believe the secret to understanding this commandment can be found in looking to our Savior's reflection upon it and taking our cue from him. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell." As with last week's discussion, we see that Jesus takes the commandment and he pushes it to the extreme. Once again, he makes the point that it is possible to keep the letter of the law, that is, not commit the physical act, and yet still to break entirely the intent of the law. And for Jesus, it would always seem whether the act is committed in thought or in deed, the intent is the real issue that must be addressed, because this is what drives the whole thing. And to get to this, Jesus once again tries to push us to see what's going on within our hearts. And in so doing, I believe he reveals that the act of adultery can illuminate some of the primary issues at stake, not only in human relationships in general, but in successful marriages in particular. And this is what I'd like to look at. The first issue that adultery brings to our attention is the need in any healthy relationship, any healthy marriage, for mutuality. Consider the illustration Jesus uses for the potential adulterer. He talks about a person lusting in their heart. You know, it's the famous line of Pearl Jimmy Carter, could never live down, you know. Well, what is the foundation of such desire, whether acted upon or not? What starts it going? Well, at its most basic level, it is actually a preoccupation with self. This is what one is saying in lust. I want that. You know. One is looking at someone else, but the focus is really on oneself. Adultery, in other words, is first a form of deep selfishness. One is concerned not with what happens to anyone else, not at all with what one might offer them. One is concerned only about what one wants to get. And this can occur in any marriage, even if there are never any instances of actual adultery. And it's always a sign of a troubled marriage. The damage, though present in more subtle ways, being just as bad. Focusing oneself solely on getting and not giving, on what you get out of the relationship. Think of it this way. Comedian Tim Allen says that when he was growing up, his mother used to tell him that the only reason why men were put on this earth was for lawn care and vehicle maintenance. Right? That's all you get, their only value, right? Conversely, many men believe that the only reason their wives exist is to cook and to clean for them and to make their life wonderful. It's like the divorced woman who, when questioned as to why she and her husband separated, replied, "The grounds of our divorce was religious differences. He believed he was God and I didn't." Have you ever heard the story of the man who one day on his commute home from work read a book entitled Man of the House? Newly enlightened by this reading, the man stormed into the house to confront his wife. Pointing his finger in her face, he said, "From now on, I want you to know that I am the man of the house, and my word is law."
That was my father.
"Tonight you are going to prepare for me a gourmet meal and a sumptuous dessert. Then when I'm done eating, you're going to draw me a bath so that I can have a relaxing soak. And when I'm finished with my bath, guess who's going to lay out my clothes and comb my hair?" His wife replied, "My guess is the funeral director." It's this whole preoccupation with ourselves, what we get out of the relationship. First sign of a bad marriage is no mutuality, there's no give and take. The couple not continually working out the rules of the exchange and each striving to abide by them. Rather, each simply out for themselves, everybody trying to get the first issue that adultery brings to our attention. What is the goal of your relationships, your marriage to you? Get or give? Are you more concerned with what you receive or with what you can offer? When was the last time you gave to your spouse purely what would make their life better? Mutuality, equality, not one person giving, the other person taking, but both giving and taking, giving and receiving. You know, it has been said that the four most important words in any marriage are these: "I'll do the dishes." When was the last time you did something for your spouse? Author Gary Chapman, in his book, The 5 Love Languages, writes, "One of the things I do for my wife regularly as an act of love is I vacuum the floors. Do you think that vacuuming floors comes naturally to me? Hardly. My mother used to make me vacuum. All through junior high and high school, I couldn't go play ball on Saturday until I finished vacuuming the entire house. In those days, I said to myself continually, when I get out of here, one thing I'm not going to do, I'm never again going to vacuum. But I vacuum our house now, and I vacuum it regularly. And there's only one reason I vacuum our house: love. You couldn't pay me enough to vacuum, but I do it for love because I know how much it helps my wife out. You see, when an action doesn't come naturally to you, it is a greater expression of love. My wife knows that when I vacuum the house, it is nothing but 100% pure, unadulterated love. It's mutuality, giving, not just taking. Related to this, then, the second issue that this commandment raises is the issue of support of one another. You know, this prohibition against adultery next brings to our attention the great danger of objectifying people. Once again, returning to Jesus' reflection on the subject. When one lusts after another person, one is not only thinking of one's own wants, oneself, one is also seeing that other person as a thing, not a full human being, but something wanted, something desired, an object. Notice that Jesus doesn't say that if you simply find someone attractive, that you sin. Recognizing the attractiveness of another person is normal, it's natural, it's part of the drive that draws us to our mate. The issue is simply what you do with that and where it takes you, you know? Think of it this way. There's an old story that's told of two Buddhist monks who one day were walking in a drenching thunderstorm. They came to a stream and it was swollen out of its banks. A beautiful young woman stood there wanting to get to the other side, but she was afraid of the currents. And in characteristic of Buddhist compassion, one of the monks said, "Can I help you?" And the woman said, I need to cross this stream. And the monk picked the beautiful young woman up and carried her across the water and put her down on the other side. And his companion then continued on their journey. After about 2 miles of walking in complete silence, suddenly the second monk stopped and said to his companion, "I have a bone to pick with you. I'm very upset with you. As Buddhist monks, we have taken vows not to look at a woman, much less touch her body. Back there at the river, you did both. I can't believe you held that beautiful young woman." To this, the first monk replied, "My brother, I put that woman down 2 miles ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Recognizing the attractiveness of another person is normal and natural. The issue is what you do with that, whether or not you keep on carrying it, right? That is, the problem occurs when an attraction is encouraged, it's fostered, it's allowed to turn into a desire for another, a lust from the verb to devour. That is, you desire to possess and consume them. They are merely a thing to you. They're an object. And what's the problem here? Well, if something is merely an object to us, what does that then do to how we feel about it? Well, we don't really care about it, and thus we can easily, in a good conscience, mistreat it. Just think about how this destructive objectifying of other people plays itself out constantly in daily life. For example, in the social world, it stands at the heart of such all too common occurrences of sexual harassment in the workplace. It's a part of date rape, and it's also part of the so-called extramarital casual affair, an oxymoron if there ever was one, whose justification is always, it didn't mean anything, which if true actually means more. All of these are based on objectification, the dehumanizing of another human being. Don't see another person as a real, full human being, rather just as a thing for oneself. Once you've done that, the rest is easy. You're free to do what you like because who cares, you know? Sadly, the same kind of thing often happens right within many marriages. The extreme example being the abuser, who views their spouse only as their property and an object they can treat with as they desire. Of course, similar kinds of things also take place in many much more ordinary, more subtle ways. For instance, do you want to know what the most common and most difficult to resolve marital problem there is? It's when one of the persons in the marriage changes. Something about them becomes different from who they have been. Maybe new values, new goals, new expectations. What frequently happens in such cases is that the partner of this person becomes upset. Why? Because to them it appears that their partner has broken the rules of their marriage. She is not who I married. Translation, they're not who I think they should be. The inverse of this, its mirror image, if you will, being the person who marries somebody, expecting, indeed even planning on changing them. Oh, I know he's a slob, but I can change him. Oh, I know she wants to have her own career, but she'll change her mind once the kids start coming along. Oh, I know that he treats me badly. Sometimes he even hurts me, but my love will turn him around. Good luck. What's the old saying? Most people spend half their life constantly trying to change their spouse, and the other half constantly complaining that their spouse is not the person they married. Objectification, the other person not real, not a totally real, but rather a thing that we want only on our terms, not theirs. Simply put, do you want to know if you have a good relationship, married or otherwise? Ask yourself, does this person see me as a complete human being, see real greatness in me? Do they want to hold me back, or do they want the best for me? And do they encourage that best? Do they support it? Do they work for that, even if it may cause some difficulty for them? And do I seek the same for them? Good relationships bring out the best in each person. The participants are not objects, but living, breathing human beings supporting each other's humanity and growth and change. Consider the following true story. Many years ago, a writer had written a manuscript for a book and had sent it to several publishers without success. He grew so discouraged that he threw the manuscript into the wastepaper basket. His wife, who believed greatly in him and knew that this was just a momentary frustration, tried to salvage the manuscript, but he told her sternly, "We've wasted enough time on it. I forbid you to remove it from the wastebasket." Undeterred, she decided to show the manuscript to at least one more publisher. And when she arrived at the publisher's office, she pulled out the most unusual-looking proposal the publisher had ever received. Underneath a wrapping of brown paper was a wastepaper basket still holding the writer's manuscript. This way, she reasoned, she was not technically going against her husband's wishes. If she did not remove the manuscript from the wastebasket, the publisher did it for her. And when he read it, he loved it. The writer in this story? Norman Vincent Peale, and the manuscript was The Power of Positive Thinking. The book that Peale tossed in the trash can eventually sold 30 million copies. His wife believed in him, wanted him to grow and to move and to live, and she supported that, even at risk to herself and to the relationship. Does your partnership nurture growth or stagnation? Second issue, objectification. Which leads us into the third issue that is raised here, namely the prime importance of solidarity within a marriage. This is, of course, the very heart of this commandment. At its most basic level, it's about the fact that marriage, at its core, is two people joined to each other and no one else. This is the primary human relationship for them. As it says in the book of Genesis, in the description of the very first marriage, "Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh." Marriage is about leaving and clinging. That is, for the married person, it's about making all other human relationships secondary to one's relationship with one's spouse, leaving all others and clinging to this one person. Not that this doesn't mean it doesn't have other relationships, other interests. That's part of being a healthy, well-rounded individual. It's just a question of order. What takes priority? Adultery, of course, being at its most basic definition, a dividing up, this fundamental joining, a subdivision of this union. You see, this is exactly where a lot of couples unknowingly fall into trouble in their marriages. They never commit any formal act of adultery, but their marriages are destroyed just the same by the intent that lies behind it, namely subdivision. That is, they allow other people, other issues to take prominence over their relationship with their spouse. For some, it's work. For others, it's the kids. For still others, it's other family members, parents, friends, whatever. Ironically, for many, it's just being so busy out trying to create a perfect marriage. Beautiful house, secure retirement, every possible activity for the children, that they lose track of their spouse in the process. The person they're actually married to becomes secondary to creating a perfect marriage. Too many married people allow themselves to choose too many other things before their spouse, and thus their marriages are in trouble. The main thing that many people choose being their original families, their parents, over their spouse. Always causes trouble. Kind of like the old joke, about the two cannibals who had just finished a meal and one of them is holding his stomach in pain. The other cannibal asks, "What's the matter?" To which the first cannibal replies, "Well, I just ate my mother-in-law and she still doesn't agree with me." It never goes well, right? I once knew a guy whose mother and wife just could not get along. It's classic mother-in-law routine, right? The two women were always at each other's throats. They disagreed on everything. And in every argument, you know who the husband sided with? With his mother. With mommy, right? Well, guess what happened? Surprise, surprise, one day he woke up divorced. Right? He wasn't making his spouse his primary connection. He wasn't choosing her first and above all others. It's like you hear a lot of married people nowadays carrying on relationships with other people online. It's playing with fire. They say it's okay, it's just talk. But curiously, many having more personal, intimate conversations by computer than they're having with their own spouse in the same room. Amen. Let's be clear, this is adultery, plain and simple, because such people are choosing someone else to be closer to in their heart than their spouse. That's what adultery is ultimately about, even without any physical act. It's intimacy. Basically, a lot of people have trouble in their marriages because when they get to the party, they don't dance with the one they came with. They spend all their time dancing with everybody else. If you want a successful marriage, you dance with the one who brung you. Right? Simply put, marriage is a choice. It's the only relationship within your family that is a choice. Remember, you don't choose your parents and you don't choose your kids. You don't choose your siblings, your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, in-laws, third cousins, twice removed, whatever. You get what you get. Marriage is the only pure choice within a family, and thus it only exists as long as you make that choice. It is two people saying to one another, out of a world full of people, I choose you for all time. It's two people choosing for one another. Most marriages fall apart because the participants choose other things. To have a great marriage, you have to always remember that you have to choose it constantly. Realize that it is a choice you have to be continually making, or it will be taken away. Every day, in some way, choose one another. In some small act of kindness, in some profound act of personal sacrifice. Choose one another over all other relationships. Choose one another over work. Choose one another over money. Choose one another over getting your own way. Choose one another over winning the argument. Choose one another over and over again. The story is told of a young couple who one day were visiting with an older couple who were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. 50 years. The young husband exclaimed, "That is a long time to be married to one person." And the old gentleman looked over at his wife with deep love in his eyes and said, "It would have been a lot longer without her." A great marriage, a great love is created by continually choosing one another over and over again, day after day, month after month, year after year. Third issue, solidarity, which leads us into our fourth and final issue here, namely romance. Do you know that according to Harlequin Publishing, which has been in the romance business for half a century, more than 180 million romance novels are purchased each year, with Harlequin itself selling an average of 5.5 romance books per second. People are desperate for romance. And this is my final point here. As with last week, this commandment before us, it's stated negatively, something we're not to do, but that's not its real meaning. That is, God is not simply telling us something we're not to do, He's trying to tell us what we should do. So what is the positive restatement of our commandment today? Well, the commandment essentially says, don't romance other people. So what's the reverse? Romance your spouse. So many couples finally fail to do this. They take each other for granted. They neglect the relationship. And if not having their marriages actually fall apart, at the very least their marriages are not what they could be. As a young child once said, you really shouldn't say I love you unless you mean it, but if you do mean it, you should say it a lot because people forget. If you mean it, you should say it a lot because people forget. Romance your spouse. Say I love you, hold hands, go on dates. And by this I don't mean, as someone once sarcastically said, my wife and I have a great marriage because every week we reserve 2 nights to go out to dinner and then take a quiet walk on the beach. Her night is Tuesday, my night is Friday. No. Romance each other, not yourself. All right? Basically, returning to where we began, marriage is about falling in love over and over again with the same person. Have you taken the time today to fall in love with your spouse? To remember what draws you to them, not to just be hung up on maybe what problems you're having right now, but to remember why you love them, and then to express this that you see to them, to show them and to tell them. How do they most need to hear that and see that from you today? Quadriplegic Joni Eareckson Tada, who was paralyzed in a diving accident as a teenager, she reflects on her wedding day and what she learned that day. She writes, I felt so awkward as my girlfriends strained to shift my paralyzed body into a cumbersome wedding gown. No amount of corseting and binding gave me a perfect shape. The dress just didn't fit well. Then as I was wheeling into the church, I glanced down and noticed that I had accidentally run over the hem of my dress, leaving a greasy tire mark. My paralyzed hands couldn't hold the bouquet of daisies that lay off-center in my lap. And my wheelchair, though decorated for the wedding, was still a big, clunky gray machine with belts, gears, and ball bearings. I certainly didn't feel like the picture-perfect bride in all the bridal magazines. I inched my chair closer to the last pew to catch a glimpse of my fiancé Ken in front. And there he was, standing tall and stately in his formal attire. And I noticed him looking for me, craning his neck as far as he could to see up the aisle. He couldn't wait to see me. With that, my face flushed, and I suddenly couldn't wait to be with him. The love in Ken's face had washed away all my feelings of unworthiness. To him, I was his pure and perfect bride. He still looks at me that way, and I try to see myself in his eyes and to see him the same way. It's how Christ, the model of love, sees us, reflected in our best moments, in our marriages. Someone once said, it takes 2 people to make a successful marriage, but only 1 to make it a failure. The 7th commandment, God trying to lead us into great marriages through sharing and supporting, choosing and romancing. Will we listen and be truly blessed? You shall not commit adultery. Let us now prepare to celebrate the sacrament of our Lord. Would you please turn to the order for Holy Communion found on page 12 in the front of the hymn.